So today we're going to talk about small color space theory according to Steve. If you remember a couple of days ago, I posted some test targets that you could print to see just how good your printer profiles are and just how accurate your system is. If you're running a color calibrated monitor, if you've got reasonably good ICC profiles, those targets should print reasonably well. But there's one part of the equation that I didn't talk about, and that's the working ICC color space that you have in Photoshop. So what you're seeing right now on the screen projected in 3D is an sRGB color space in the middle and Adobe RGB 1998 as the wireframe on the outside. And what you can see is just how much bigger Adobe RGB 1998 is than sRGB. And bigger's better, right? Well, not necessarily. Bigger is only better if it matches closer to the gamut volume of the paper you're printing on. The inner color space that you're seeing here, the solid frame, that's sRGB. sRGB is like one of these default color spaces that's been around for a very long time, and it's a really wonderful color space if you want to print to matte surface material. Let me explain why. sRGB has a gamut volume. Let me turn off the other one here. sRGB has a gamut volume of just about 550,000. That's a pretty good sized gamut volume. It turns out that most matte surface papers, good Epson papers, Hahnemuhle, Canson, good matte surface papers, ICC profiles, run right around 550, 575,000. So what does that mean? It means that the mapping that occurs when you go from an RGB to CMYK environment is small. It means that when you're going from a working environment of sRGB to say Hahnemuhle PhotoRag, the way the file has to be translated, has to be mapped, is really a small gap between the two. And as a result, you're very unlikely to run into things such as hue angle shifts, where a blue comes out purple or a red comes out orange. You get much more accurate color. So sRGB is a very safe color space to work and edit in, because on your monitor, you're going to actually be able to reproduce and see all those colors in a very accurate way. So if you're posting images just on the internet, I always tell people, always save your files in sRGB, because they're going to be the most accurate that you're ever going to see on the web. Your iPhone and your tablets all hit sRGB perfectly, but Adobe RGB 1998, unless you have a monitor that can hit it, like the new iMac monitors, only hit about 85% of Adobe RGB 1998. That means there's 15% worth of color and density that you cannot see. So from just a visual editing standpoint, sRGB, that smaller color space, makes a lot of sense. So let me pull back up now Adobe RGB 1998. Once again, just look at how much bigger it is. So where would I want to use a color space like Adobe RGB 1998? If I was printing on really great glossy paper. If I'm printing on glossy paper has the ability to actually maximize what Adobe RGB 1998 has. Adobe RGB 1998 has a gamut volume of just over 1 million. If you remember that I told you sRGB's total gamut volume is right around 550,000. So it's literally, twice the size. And it turns out that most good glossy papers today have a gamut volume of 1 million, maybe a little bit over. So the mapping, once again, that translation from your RGB space in Photoshop to your CMYK printed space is closer. And as a result, you get to have more accurate color, more accurate tonality. So it's important to match the color space that you work in Photoshop to the paper and the ICC that you're going to work on the output if you're looking for the most accurate. For all photography is about controlled loss. So what we want to do is you want to start with the color space that's big enough to hold everything we got. But you don't really want to work from spaces as big as, say, PROPHOTO. PROPHOTO is absolutely massive. If I pulled it up right now, it's bigger than my screen. It's so big. And as a result, it has too much volume. So think about what your workflow is. If you're shooting a digital camera, generally speaking, you have the option of Adobe RGB 1998 or sRGB. If I'm going for absolute accuracy and I'm taking those images and I'm only going to post them on the internet, you might as well shoot an sRGB and just call it a day. If your plan is to make exhibition quality prints and you might be printing on glossy paper, then okay, I might pull up Adobe RGB 1998 as the color space in the digital camera. And then in Photoshop, I can make the decision of I'm going to print in matte, so I'm going to compress down to sRGB to get closer to that ICC profile of the printer, or I'm going to print on some glossy material and I'm going to stay within Adobe RGB 1998. So an experiment that I would encourage everybody to do who's watching this video, you've got matte surface paper, make a print on Adobe RGB 1998 and then make a print on sRGB. And what you'll find is that on that matte surface paper, the sRGB is going to just be that much more accurate in terms of color. Your blues and your reds and everything will render correctly. If you're going to print on a glossy paper and you've started out with Adobe RGB 1998, what you're going to find is that you have a more nuanced reds and blues and greens because you just have more color volume to work with. So one final thought. I'm all about accuracy for most of my work. You know, if I print from a bigger color space, yeah, I might get more color on that paper, but guess what? It's not going to be accurate. So when you're evaluating the prints, look at neutrality. Look at like how accurate is that gray. Look at the blues. Is it shifting blue, purple and the reds? But if you're going for accuracy of the print, I think you'll find that the smaller color space or the color space that's more closely matched to your printer ICC profile is the best color space.